Now back to Inside Real Estate. Here's Mike the Realtor.
All right, folks, we are back. It's Inside Real Estate with Mike Kruizinga here. InsideRealEstateRadio.com is the website. InsideRealEstateRadio.com is the website. Time for our special segment. As you know, we do a lot more than real estate on this show. We do a little bit of sports, entertainment, politics, and, of course, oftentimes we have great authors come on the show, and we talk about their latest books. Here in studio with us, we have author Roy Mark, who is author of Fixin' to Die, and also the brand new book, Live by Chance, Love by Choice, and Kill by Profession. And I love that title. So we have Roy Mark here in the studio. How you doing, Roy?
I'm doing fine, Mike. Thank you.
Great to have you on board. And by the way, the man behind the book as well, Lieutenant Colonel, retired Lieutenant Colonel Fowler, is here in studio with us as well. So LTC, how you doing over there?
I'm feeling fine today, Mike.
Good to see you. So Roy, I mean, let's get into this book a little bit. Obviously, LTC is kind of the show behind the show here. And so how did you guys connect and then start to develop putting this into writing?
Well, our connection came about after I wrote the first book, Fixin' to Die Rag. I made a lot of connections with some of the guys in the Charlie Company of 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion. And after I wrote that book, Lieutenant Colonel Fowler got in touch with me, and we started exploring the possibility of writing another book. So as it happened, I was I live in Thailand, and I was headed to the United States at that time to attend the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association in Washington, D.C. So we made arrangements to meet in Houston, and we kicked around the possibility of writing a new book and talked about his experiences. And there were so many experiences. We decided that we didn't want to write a 1,000-page book, which was what it would take in order to cover all of his experiences. So
Right.
we narrowed it down, and we were shooting for about a 250 to 300-page book, and we narrowed down his experiences and got busy after I got back to Thailand. We used Skype back and forth. We must have spent 100 hours or more on Skype and put this thing together, and I'm real proud of the finished product. And his experiences are just amazing.
Yeah, they are. There's no doubt about it. It's a great read, and you're right. I mean, just there's so much material there that he has had in his life. And let's go to and I read this in the book, and tell us about the title. And what a great title! But it's a part of the story, and really a part of a relationship in the story. So, Live by Chance, Love by Choice, Kill by Profession. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, sure. In the book, it talks about Gary Fowler when he was a warrant officer pilot in Vietnam. This was in 1970. His crew chief was a guy named Greg Weber. And, of course, the crew chief is the guy that keeps the pilots out of trouble. I think that's Gary would agree with that. And they obviously worked together. And toward the end of what was then a warrant officer, Gary Fowler's 1 year in Vietnam, Greg Weber gave, as a going-away gift, I guess, and a article of remembrance, he gave him his Zippo cigarette lighter. And engraved on the cigarette lighter was the saying, "Live by chance, love by choice, kill by profession." And so Gary has had that with him all of these years. In fact, he sent that cigarette lighter to me in Thailand, and I had a professional photographer take a photo of that, and it's included in the book. So that title was chosen by Colonel Fowler, and I agree with you. I think it's a fantastic title.
Yeah, I think so too, and the fact that it has so much meaning, to the relationships, within the book. Let's kind of take us from the start of the book and kind of progress through it, which is, Lieutenant Colonel Fowler's, life, military life to a degree. Kind of start from the beginning a little bit and take us on through.
As far as military experience, I think his military experience started when he was in high school at well, I'm about to say Fork Union, but I'm going to...
It was Valley Forge Military.
Valley Forge Military College. So he went in as a plebe, as a private, and graduated 4 years later as a lieutenant, company commander. And so that was the beginning of his military experience. His father, who was in the Army also earlier in his life, but his father wanted him to become a lawyer, and Gary, as a young man, wanted no part of that. He wanted the adventurous life. So after 1 year of college, as soon as he became 18 years old, he headed straight for the Army recruiter, and the Army recruiter told him about flight school and the possibility of becoming a helicopter pilot, and that's when his career really began. So he went to boot camp at Fort Polk in Louisiana, and after boot camp at Fort Polk, he went to Fort Walters in Texas, learned to be a pilot, and from there he went on to Fort Rucker. Fort Rucker in Alabama, and from Fort Rucker in Alabama, of course, directly without stopping and without passing go, he went to Vietnam.
Yeah. Talk about, and maybe Lieutenant Colonel, maybe jump in here for a minute. You know, the chopper pilots are what got everything done, you know, in Vietnam. I mean, you guys were, you know, putting the guys on the ground. You were bringing the ammo to the ground, and then you're, you know, evacing guys out of there. And you guys were flying, you know, 12, 16, 18-hour days nonstop, day in, day out. I mean, without you guys, you know, the guys on the ground, you know, would not get their ammo, would not get off the ground. Without you guys, nothing would really happen. I mean, you guys, it was a tough job.
That it was, and we never knew whether we were going to be alive the next day or not. But the 1st Cavalry Division was designed as the Air Mobile Division. So basically the entire division could move by air by helicopter and some fixed-wing aircraft for longer hauls. But our primary thrust was we were there on the Cambodian invasion on 1 May 1970. And, of course, we were in Cambodia for a period of 60 days before we were ordered to pull out. And our pilots flew 400 or 500 hours each within that time frame, which is pretty much unheard of.
Yeah, that's unreal. Talk about some of the things of, you know, how do you get through flying that much and still staying sane? Because the demands on, you know, a helicopter pilot are so tremendous, not to mention when you're taking fire, you're having to fly low to the ground. Oftentimes you have terrain that you've got to worry about. And then flying with the lack of sleep, how are you doing this day in and day out? I mean, how did you guys get by and fly at such a rate that is at the top level?
Well, when you fly that much, you can fly a helicopter about as good as Michael Jordan can play basketball. And, of course, it takes a lot of physical skill, plus the other aviation skills of flying on instruments and so forth. Roy's first book, Fixin' to Die Rag, Roy lost his cousin in Vietnam, and of course I knew Mark Holtum, but we lost between March and September of 1970, we lost 22 people out of just our unit, our one company. So we took a lot of losses, a lot of dead, and at the same time people were PCSing. So the young aviators that came in, like Dan and Phil and myself, we had to rapidly adjust and become aircraft commanders and continue the fight day after day. And you just have to be disciplined enough. And of course, if we were in Tay Ninh, that was very close to the Cambodian border, and if we weren't being shot at or shot down or whatever during the day, We were getting mortared and rocketed at night. It was very intense. The Ho Chi Minh Trail at that time was no longer a little mud trail. It was a 2-lane paved highway, and they actually had signs up, motor pool here, hospital there. And we got into a huge fight when we went into Shakey's Hill in Cambodia, which was a huge supply depot where they were preparing at that time to invade the South. And of course, they were only 70 or 80 miles from Saigon at that time. But we disrupted their task at that time. And then later, of course, when the war ended, they came right down Highway 1 with tanks. And in one chapter, I cover the period where we ran into T-34 tanks during a late light set-in. So things were constantly changing. We were taking a lot of fire. A lot of people were injured, killed, and it was very intense.
Absolutely. Let's fast forward in the book a little bit. Let's go to South America a little bit. There's an operation in here where you guys have to start learning to, get debt qualified on a Navy ship, and then you're going to go into South America and basically an operation to steal one of the latest and greatest at this time new Russian airships, gunships. Talk about that one a little bit.
Yeah, at that time, of course, the Cold War was hot and very intense, and what the American people didn't understand that there was a lot of fighting in Central and South America. And at Managua Airport, there were 12 Hind helicopters, and we were tasked to go in and snatch one to bring it back to be dissected. And the Hind at that time, in the mid '80s, was a new Russian helicopter that could carry troops and act as a gunship. You could actually go in and hold ground with that helicopter, and they had 12 at the Managua Airport. We launched off the USS Deo with 2 Hueys and 2 highly trained warrant officers, penetrated the radar flying in from the 12-mile limit, and landed at Managua Airport, secured a perimeter, and actually the warrant officers stole the one helicopter, and we flew out with the 2 Hueys back into Honduras and secured the aircraft for the United States government.
And this was a gunship, the Russian gunship. This was used in Afghanistan, was it not?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was heavily used in Afghanistan and used to kill a lot of Afghani people, heavily armed.
Right. Absolutely. And then, so fast forwarding a little bit more through the book, you think maybe you're going to be retired, and then that doesn't happen. They ask you to come back. 9/11 occurs, and take us from there.
Yeah, I actually had retired right at the end of 2000, and I was 2001, and I was teaching school at a juvenile boot camp, teaching math and science. Of course, it had to be a boot camp, and 9/11 hit, and on the morning of 9/11, I was dating my second wife. My first wife, it's covered in the book, is deceased. And later, Melissa died of pancreatic cancer. But on the morning on 9/11, before the attack, we were in my restaurant in Farmville, Virginia, near Hampton-Sydney College, and we decided to get married. And, of course, later that morning, the 9/11 attack occurred, and 2 days later, the phone rang, and I was invited to come back on active duty and report to the Pentagon, which, of course, I did. And so I spent another 3 years on active duty, and that's during the period in March of 2003. We were selected before they attacked Baghdad as a last-minute idea for the counterattack corps, which was 16,000 troops with armor and artillery and so forth, to seize the 2 bridges going into Baghdad from the west side. And that we did. We seized the bridges crossing the Tigris and Euphrates River almost simultaneously, which allowed the counterattack corps to flow right into Baghdad.
Right. And so you commanded, 40 Blackhawks on that operation to seize those two bridges, which were vital to the operation.
Yeah, yes. You always want to take in a bridge. Is very key, and these were large bridges. They were huge. It was like crossing the St. Louis Road. They weren't quite that big, but by securing the bridges, it didn't stall the attack, because when you have that many troops moving, you want to be able to flow right in,
right.
And that allowed the commander to do that, saving a lot of lives and time.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great story. I mean, from stem to stern, an amazing story. Roy, I think you did such an amazing job putting it all to paper. And you even put in a couple stories from when they were kids. Talk about that, Roy, on how you kind of decided to put that in there.
Well, talking with Gary and getting his background, I realized pretty early on that this is an amazing guy, that his experiences, the man was being made from the child, and his experiences as a child was what made the man. One of the experiences that he was telling me about that I thought should be included was when he was, I think, about 6 or 7 years old. His older brother and he decided that they would fly like their father. Their father had been a pilot pre-World War II and during World War II, and at that time he was flying for Curtiss Wright as a test pilot. So young Gary Fowler, as a 7-year-old, decided that he and his brother would build some wings to attach to his arms, and they would fly off of a chicken coop. And obviously he was not successful, but it took 2 tries before he decided that he would wait a few more years before he actually would fly into the sky like his father. Another story that I included,
Parker's Tomb?
Parker's Tomb. Now that was...
That's a good story right there. That reminds me of some exploits from when I was a kid, some of the things that we used to do.
There is a tomb called Parker's Tomb near where they were living, and he and his brother decided that based on the stories, the legend of Captain Blackbeard, not the famous Mr. Teach that was the famous Blackbeard, but another Blackbeard had recovered some gold from a sunken Spanish galleon, and in an effort to transport that gold up to Canada during the War of 1812, he became stranded, and the legend was that the gold was buried nearby. And Noah Parker, the legend goes, had recovered that gold and taken it to his grave, which was within the tomb called Parker's Tomb. So the 2 brothers, along with 2 of their friends, decided they would break into Parker's Tomb and recover, actually I said gold, it was silver bars that they were trying to recover. Mm-hmm. So they broke into this tomb and located in the dark the crypt that contained Mr. Parker, and opened up the casket, which was an old wooden casket like we see in the old cowboy movies. And as they were trying to pull this casket off of a big stone table, the end of it came off, and they had to reach into this casket through the bony feet of Mr. Parker, and they did actually reach in there and recover a brick of silver.
Amazing. Well, I love the way you included some stories from when they were kids, because you're right, it sets up, that adventurous, that spirit. You could tell, where they were going in life. And then the amazing story, obviously the content was already there with Lieutenant Colonel, and the way you took it, put it in paper. It's a great read. This is available anywhere you find books, and of course you can go to Amazon as well. I would highly recommend folks grab the first book, Fixin' to Die Rag, and then of course the latest book, Live by Chance, Love by Choice, Kill by Profession, by Roy Mark. Any parting words, Roy?
Well, my thoughts on the experience is that I was in the Marine Corps, and I went to Vietnam just for a few days on a Navy ship, and I had been indoctrinated by the Marine Corps to think that the Army soldiers were not up to par with Marines. Working with Gary Fowler and all of the guys that I've interviewed for these 2 books, and listening to their stories and seeing what they went through and how they handled it, these Army guys that flew helicopter pilots, they are top notch. There's none better, or there were none better back then, and I'm sure today is the same thing. So I've been thoroughly impressed with all of these Army guys that I've been dealing with and talking with and reading and writing about their experiences. They are top notch.
Yeah, absolutely. My father, by the way, is a Vietnam veteran as well, and he was a Marine, and he had some of those same thoughts as well. But then, later on, he's like, we all went through hell, and although he didn't like to talk about it much, hardly at all, except for the fact that, he felt like, they all went through hell, and to a degree, not treated that well on the return home. One of the stories my dad mentioned to me, even by the officers, he said he didn't put in for leave until quite a while into it, and he went to Sydney on leave, and he had lost all of his, his good greens, if you will, and so he's going with a rucksack, and the officers are absolutely, and he's dirty as all get out, and he said the officers were just giving me absolute crap. And he said this one officer came up to me and he was just giving it to me. And he said another officer came over that outranked him. He said, "Can't you tell he just got out of the bush? Leave this kid alone." And so folks at home, I think, not treating the Vietnam veterans that well, hearing from my dad, and also some of the officers as well that weren't in the front lines. But we certainly appreciate everything that you guys did serving, in the military. And folks, it's a great book. Catch this book anywhere fine books are sold. Of course, it's on Amazon. Roy Mark is the author, and the website is
www.roymark.org.
roymark.org. There you go, folks. Live by Chance, Love by Choice, Kill by Profession. The story of Lieutenant Colonel Gary Fowler by Roy Mark. Folks, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come on back. We'll see you on the other side.